Hello and welcome back to Office of Horror. It is now 2024. The same thing is happening as always. We're reading books, different categories every month. We're slowly going to work through this shelf. This year I'm going to try and best to not buy any new books. I'm just going to try and work my way through, follow the same patterns and same routines. I've got a lot more other projects happening this year, so I might not have as much time. I'm trying to be reasonable, but since when have I ever succeeded in doing that? So the categories I'm going to do this year are a little bit slimmed down. I have a short story collection, so that's really what got me started into writing and then reading, is short stories. I began wanting to be a short story author, and I'm still sort of working in that space, although most of the things I read now are novels. So I want to go back to that. I want to read 12 short story collections, look through different styles, different ways of structuring stories, and get back to basics. The next category is going to be the Man Booker winner. Now, I very foolishly have planned to read every single Man Booker winner. So far, I'm about 20% of the way in. I think I've read 15 or so of them. And I haven't loved all of them. I think there's some that I really like, some that I really don't. I'm starting to see patterns across some of the main Man Booker winners, but I am going to push my way through it. I'm going to read 12 of those this year, see if my biases are being confirmed, or if there are any surprises from things that have won one of the most prestigious prizes in the world. Next two categories, very self-explanatory, are Make Me Laugh and Make Me Cry. I'm going to deliberately pick out books that I think I'm going to create some kind of emotional response, and hopefully they succeed. We'll see how things go. I very rarely emote when I read. I very rarely laugh and I very rarely cry, but I do enjoy it when I do either of them, so hopefully this category helps me find some books that I like more. Next category is series finisher. So I have started a lot of series by reading the first book and then leaving it. So there are a few long sequences that I want to get finished. This may be more than one book a month, but we'll see how things play out. And lastly, this is the most silly one, is Final Boss. These are the final bosses of literature, the books that people say are the most challenging, the most hard to get through. Looking at this list now, I realize how silly it is for me to do one of these per month. So instead, what I'm going to do is just read it as an ongoing project and slowly work my way through one by one and spin a wheel at the end of each time to see what the next one's going to be. I'm going to make a specific video on each of these, so I won't be holding myself to the same time schedule, but I do want to finish as many of these as I can this year, just to cross them off the list and eventually, in 2 or 3 years' time, finish off all the big classics and then just read what I want to read. So that's my 6 categories for the year. I am also very foolishly going to do another book a day challenge in February, so we will see how that goes. That pile is there looking at me, ready to go. I don't know how I pointed it. Yep, that's the one. But aside from that, let's get into this month's books. So a fringe benefit of reading less is that I don't have to carry as many, and my arms get to rest a little bit. So let's get into number 1. Okay, and the camera is now flipped because I don't know left and right. Book number 1 is, I don't know what this book is called. A Tree of Night by Truman Capote. So I wanted to get the full collection of the Truman Capote short stories. This is the one that they had at the used bookstore, so I thought I'd pick it up. And I really like Truman Capote as an author, but the more I read about him as a person, the more I realize he's probably not a great person. He's not nice, he's not great at keeping secrets. He's very much a person who likes to expose the kind of raw and vulnerable parts of a human being, which I guess is what I like in his stories. His stories feel very real and honest and intimate, and he probably gets that by making very close friends, hearing their deepest, darkest secrets, and then just bearing them out for the whole world to experience. So I kind of got that in Cold Blood. I wonder to what extent Breakfast at Tiffany's was the same, but to read them as fiction, they're very, very well constructed, lovely works. His writing style is just so gorgeous and warm and inviting and beautiful, and I just like his sentences, even if I can just ignore what he's doing to actually get the stories he's writing about. To look at his characters and to look at his sentences, there's just so much work and so much care and precision put into them that it's really hard not to feel touched by some of them. So this book of short stories is much lesser known compared to his major works, and I think for good reason. It's not as good. It's definitely a mixed bag. And Truman Capote he occupies a weird space because he's a New York writer, but he's also a Southern writer. And this book has some of those Southern Gothic elements to it. It has stories that are set in around Alabama, where Alabama, where he grew up, alongside Harper Lee, funnily enough. And that southern setting lends some of these stories a greater sense of darkness that I thought his New York stories had. Truman Capote, for better or for worse, seems to really love New York, whereas he has a much more complicated relationship with where he grew up in the South. And so some of these stories tend to be a bit more brutal in a sense. It has characters suffering much greater consequences and much greater consequences being covered up. And there's also a sense of the supernatural here, which I think is just totally absent from his New York stories. In the South, there's definitely the sense of things that you don't really know for sure, the supernatural starting to creep into the real world, and that makes these stories also kind of harder to follow, harder to pass. Sometimes I'll be reading midway and realize, hey, this is probably meant to be a spooky supernatural story rather than a real story of real people, and that's all of this came together to make me not love this collection as much as I really should have, even though some of them are really beautiful. I love the story of, it's called Shut a Final Door, which was my favorite of this collection, which is about a truly awful human being, someone who really can't make strong and meaningful relationships, and how he just damages his way through the lives of many people, and how people finally start to realize who he is, and how he would just never really change. I just found that so beautiful, the way that there was still sympathy for this just genuinely awful person. It made me kind of see how people like him can succeed in society, because he really charms his way through. And that's ultimately what I still love about Capote, what will make me want to finish the rest of his books, even if I didn't love this one, is that even if the stories themselves aren't as strong, you can tell they're being written by a really skillful writer, so I still give this a 3 out of 5. Book number 2, this is my Make Me Laugh, Notes from a Small Island by Bill Bryson. I don't really know anything about Bill Bryson, and I'm very sorry, but I did not like this book. I really, really did not. It's meant to be a humorous journey around the United Kingdom. The premise is that the author is an American journalist who's lived in the UK for a long time. He's really enjoyed the United Kingdom, or England really, and so he's decided to take a public transport trip all the way around the island to visit all the small locales, talk about the regional delicacies, and just enjoy the country that he professes to like quite dearly. And it's got this really biting British sense of humor, as if he's not allowed to like it, or not allowed to truly profess he likes it, because so much of this book comes off as just insult humor for the small quirks and foibles of British life. And a lot of that to me just is not relevant or meaningful as someone who has never been to the UK and doesn't really particularly plan to, but even if I do, I definitely think I would look at it in a very different way than Bill Bryson does. It's just, I know it's meant to be funny, but it really comes off as complaining to me. It comes off as dissatisfaction. And the entire time I could see sentences and paragraphs that were positioned to be jokes, but I just didn't laugh. I just wasn't really on the same wavelength as his character. And it's a very particular sense of humor that I'm just not getting. So I did learn quite a bit about regional Britain, and a lot of that's quite enjoyable. I like the tweeness of it. I like just how much significance they put into genuinely small and meaningless things. But by the end of this book, I was just so glad for it to be over. I was getting really tired of this voice, really tired of this kind of insult humor that I just wasn't enjoying. Every now and then there's a few jokes that just don't age very well as well, and it's definitely not something that you would want to remember. If I wanted to experience Britain and the UK, I would read from someone who can more genuinely profess their liking of it, so I would give this a 2 out of 5. Also, probably the strongest excitement, despite being a comedy book, I did not laugh a single time when I read this. And my Make Me Cry for January, A Man Called Ove, I also did not cry to this. I think this book really benefited from YouTube and Book Talk. I first found out about this book from a Clockwork Reader on BookTube, where she read 5 books that would make her cry. I've actually now read, I think, 4 of those books. That video had The Song of Achilles, Little Life, this one, Normal People, and They Both Die in the End. The last one is the only one I haven't read so far, and none of those 4 books have made me cry yet. I've cried at books, I've cried a lot of books, just not the ones that seem to want to make me cry. I find that they seem to be usually very sentimental and melodramatic, and that just knocks the emotion right out of my system, and this is exactly that. So before I go any further, I have to strong content warning for suicide. This book deals with the idea of suicide a lot, and it deals with it very clumsily. To me, it's not really a discussion of suicide as much as it is using suicide for cheap laughs and shock humor. Like, I just didn't really think that it covered the topic very well, and it's really not deserving of any of the pathos involved with suicide, or thoughts of suicide. I think it's very insensitive. I think, to me, this book poorly represents all its characters, and towards the end I constantly just kept thinking, this is not how things would work in real life. This is not a reflection of a real life person or a real life society. So it just made it very hard for me to access it as a comedy or a tragedy. It just was a little bit fake. But the way that I would describe this book, so we follow Ove, who's a man in Sweden and is very old and very grumpy. He is a very kind of stereotypical man's man kind of person. He's good with his hands, he fixes things, he worked on the railroad. He's very true to his morals and his precepts or his attitudes, and he's just rubs everybody in the community the wrong way. He's very cranky, he's a bit of a curmudgeon, and so he's living in this gated community with a few neighbors that are moving in, and he just, at the start, does not get along with them. And the narrative premise is that he keeps trying to kill himself in various ways, and every time he's interrupted by a neighbor, and he eventually gets so frustrated that he insists on helping the neighbor, and that keeps him alive for a bit longer, and this keeps going. He's a widower, he doesn't really have any close friends anymore, and the core crux of the novel's narrative, which I actually quite respect, is about community, is about the fact that making friendships and connections, regardless of what age you are, regardless of what your values or beliefs are, that everybody has a right to make meaningful friendships and connections, and it can often be quite easy to do so, that you can bridge various barriers of race and gender and social class and age and physical ability and sexual orientation and all of those things. Community trumps all of that, and that is the core moral of this book, which I agree with. I just wish it was handled a bit better, because I don't really think the emotions are earned very well in this book. The comedic moments are at the expense of characters who don't feel like real human beings. So a real human being going through thoughts and situations like this will probably not enjoy this. And in the same sense, the sadness doesn't feel earned as well. It's playing upon things that are just traditionally known to be sad. You know, losing a partner is known to be sad. Suicidal thoughts are known to be sad. The book doesn't evoke the sadness through its language or its construction. The book just kind of piggybacks off the sadness that is already around these topics. And so by the end, I was not close to crying at all. I was kind of glad it's over. And I really hate to say this, but the first two of these two categories, to make me laugh did not make me laugh, to make me cry did not make me cry, I would give this a 2 out of 5. I see why it was so successful, and as Fredrik Backman's debut, it really feels like a very young person writing a very old character. I haven't read any of his further works, but he's gone on to be very successful, so I'm sure he's benefited a lot from the exposure from BookTok and TikTok, so I can only hope that future books have improved and have given itself a bit more seriousness to the topics that they choose to tackle. Okay, book number 4. This is The Gathering by Enright. This won the Man Booker Prize in 2007. It is a Irish novel, and it is Irish literary fiction in a really good way. So I think that out of all the various places in the world, I think Ireland, out of its fiction, is so well known and so storied and so historied. It has such a distinct style, and I've also personally read so many Irish authors and engaged with their works, either loving them or disliking them, but engaging with Irish authors so much. And Anne Enright writes beautifully. She is a really, really gorgeous writer that can just pull out emotion when it's required. And even though the topics of this novel, I think, are a bit extreme, and if you were to just tell me the premise of this novel, content warning, child abuse is one of the topics of this novel. If you were to tell me that the novel's about this, I would be worried or concerned, but knowing the skill of the author and knowing how delicately she leads the author into these themes, I'm actually quite impressed by this book. I think that the writing style is really clear. I love the whole generational thing going on. So the premise is that we have a female narrator named Veronica. She's coming back to her childhood home after the death of her brother Liam, and she's since then married, had children, come back to this enormous family of 11 siblings, and having to kind of grapple with her role in the family, how her various childhood experiences and the varied traumas within, how they affect her relationship with her brother, her deceased brother, and also the other family members as well. Despite being a fairly short book with 15 something characters and 11 siblings, I thought they were really carried across well. The relationships feel like the way that you would meet a large group of family members at once. So if you think about family reunions where you meet people that you've never seen before or you've only heard about, it's the same feeling where you're not going to know everyone perfectly, and you're not going to meet everyone or remember everyone's names, and the book's kind of aware of that, and it uses that experience to create a stronger sense of emotion. You find a few characters that you can latch onto, but that safety and stability is really suspect when you now have this situation where a family member is deceased and everyone has their own opinion about it. So this was a very challenging read, a very emotional read. I love that I was able to get back into literary fiction after reading books that just didn't really grab me for the rest of this month. So I would give this a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed this book, and I was surprised to see that it's not one of the best regarded Man Booker novels. It currently sits at something like 3.2 on Goodreads and Storygraph, and I don't see as many people talking about it as things like Life of Pi, which I didn't give a great rating. So I would recommend this. I would recommend if you see this, you'll probably find it very easily at a thrift store because it won a prize, but it's not really talked about, so I'm sure it's just floating everywhere. I liked it. I really enjoyed it. It gets a 4 out of 5. Okay, and my story finisher for January 2024, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. So last year what I did was I wanted to make a video where I read through the entire Sherlock Holmes series. I have it all collected in these 2 big volumes. I was going to title the video Reading Sherlock Holmes Until I Get Bored. I read A Study in Scarlet, I read The Sign of the Four, and I got bored. I couldn't get any further. And I thought that was really silly to make a video where I read 2 novels and got bored, so I just didn't. I just set it aside. But I decided to go back and read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I liked The Adventures a lot more, so unfortunately I didn't actually talk about A Study in Scarlet or The Sign of the Four, so I can't really build upon that. But in a very quick summary, I thought those 2 books were a bit silly. Like, the plot twists in each one were just a bit too wild for me to enjoy, because Sherlock as a character is just so much smarter than the audience that you can't really figure anything out. You can't go, oh yeah, I see those clues that he followed. Sometimes it's just absolutely bizarre, like the real solution to those mysteries were just so out there that there's no way you could have predicted it. And that problem is really solved in Adventures. I feel like because Adventures is a series of short stories, the short stories have to have a clearer scope, and we get to see that structure of the mystery better executed here than in A Study in Scarlet and The Sign of the Four, which both of those to me felt like they were relying more on shock and surprise, whereas Adventures is just really well-crafted mystery stories. So not every single one of them are really good. I think that the values of the Victorian era are definitely showing, and so there's times where the characters are really worried about something which to me just doesn't matter that much. But when there's a very simple story, character's been murdered, we don't know who's done it, there's a suspect who everyone else thinks is guilty, and Sherlock says no, they're innocent, like, that's a great hook. That's really enjoyable. If every story was like that, I would still gladly read them all. And the writing style is getting a bit better as well. I find that as the adventures go on, it's a bit cleaner, it's a bit more to the point, and it's easier to follow as well. I love Watson as a character. I love like how he seems to be getting progressively smarter as these books go on as well, that we see him develop as a person and we see him have a better relationship with Sherlock. That's a lot of fun. I like that continuity. I like how varied the stories are. I like how it looks at different members of the Victorian cityscape, and it doesn't really pinpoint any one particular group of people or kind of people as the worst or the usual suspect. I think that it says that anybody's really capable of crime, but anyone is really capable of virtue as well. So I'm enjoying it so far. I still wish that they were a little bit more believable. I know that the whole draw of the Sherlock mythos is that it's really far outlandish crimes, meant to be like a bit exaggerated, a bit kind of sensationalized. I'm a realism guy. I like realism. So I didn't gel with this quite as well. But I can see the value for what they are. I would still give it 3 out of 5 because I didn't enjoy them fully. It wasn't my favorite thing that I read this month, but I do see the value and I do see why people love them so much. So that's how I would put The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Alright, and that's my 5 books of January. The final boss book that I'm reading this month is the full Lord of the Rings trilogy. I know that's not that difficult, but it is very much the one that got away from me as a high schooler. It's the one that really turned me off fantasy for a very long time. And this time I'm definitely committed to trying to finish it. So I'm halfway through the Two Towers right now, and hopefully I will make my way through the whole set by, I want to say February, but let's be realistic, let's say it's March. February, I'm going to do a book a day, and we will see how that goes, if I unravel or if I don't. But until then, I will see you. Goodbye.